So this third screencast is focused on the skills we'll be looking at on the 16th of November. So let's start with paraphrasing. Now this is something that comes naturally to quite a lot of people, and some of you may well do this already. It is longer than verbal following. It allows you to demonstrate to the patient that they have been heard, and it's a really good way to demonstrate empathy. So what you're doing is giving back the content of what that person has said to you accurately, but in your own words. And what that can do is give them clarity, hear what they've said, but also tells them that you have understood what they have said. But we really need to be quite tentative in the way that we do that and make sure that we are checking that we have got it right, that we've understood it correctly, not assuming that we have. And what it tends to do is encourage people to keep talking. So we're trying to convey listening rather than interpreting or influencing at this point. So have a look at these three statements here. So we've got what the patient has said on the left. I've been really struggling with my eating. I just feel so tired and often feel quite nauseated. I've got no appetite anymore. And I know I should be eating more, but it's hard. I can't be bothered to cook anymore. So have a look at these three statements in the table on the right. Which one is a minimal encourager? Or which one is a paraphrase? Which is a verbal follow? So the top two, you've been really struggling with your eating, is a paraphrase. A short paraphrase though, you can't be bothered to cook anymore. That's a bit more like a verbal follow, isn't it? Because actually both of these statements are the direct words that the patient has said. So that might be like the bottom one, struggling, or it's hard. Those are both sticking with the patient's word, but the one in the middle is the paraphrase. You've had a lot of symptoms which have made it very hard for you to cook and eat, even though you need to. So that's conveying understanding of what the patient has actually said. And that's a really important thing. So all of these could be used, but the one that is the paraphrase is the one in the middle. Now, why have I got a picture of a can of worms? The reason for that is that reflections of feelings are something that a lot of people try and avoid doing. And that's because they fear opening what they see as a can of worms. They fear that the person is going to get over emotional and talk about things that they won't have any control over and won't be able to do anything about. So fear is a very common reaction when we are engaging in a conversation that looks like it might get a bit emotional. But reflection of feelings, now this is very different to just reflecting back what people have said, or the skill of reflection in practice or on practice. So please try and use the terminology accurately as you're learning these skills. So reflecting back feelings is absolutely core for demonstrating empathy to our patient and therefore our person-centered approach. We're aiming to try and understand or experience the other person's feelings or emotions, but stay separate from them. So we're not going to get emotionally involved ourselves, but we are trying to demonstrate that we understand what those emotions are and what is being conveyed. And sometimes people hear that and go, yeah, I suppose I do feel like that. It's almost as if they haven't actually registered that before. It's not the same as sympathy, which is feeling sorry for someone, which is often not helpful. But it does encourage people to continue to speak and to express how they feel emotionally. What is really important, though, is that we don't shut emotions down, because that is really hurtful and can really make people feel that we are disinterested. So to not reflect feelings is the opposite of a person-centered approach. We shouldn't gloss over emotions or pretend they're not there. And to be honest, most often when you acknowledge people's emotions, they don't completely lose the plot and become over-emotional. It does happen occasionally, but hardly ever. They just want someone to hear. And quite often in healthcare, those feelings and emotions have not really been listened to. So we can make a real difference here. So let's just have a look at some steps here of what we do when we're reflecting feelings. We need to be listening to what people are saying, listening to the feelings that they are communicating directly. I'm really frustrated by that. But also non-directly with their words and their vocal tone. And their posture. So, if someone's got their fists clenched, that suggests that they are angry or frustrated about something. If they're talking really fast, it might be anxiety. The words that they're choosing might not say anxiety, but what they're saying conveys anxiety. So we're not listening just for words, we are listening for descriptions of emotions and visual signs of emotions. So tears, facial expressions, smiles, all of those things, people wringing their hands, that often suggests anxiety. So we need to be very observant. And when you look at your assessment tools for consultations, you will find that it includes responding to non-verbal cues as well as the verbal ones. So step one is the listening and observing and noting. Step two is trying to identify and name the feelings. And I'd like you to have spend a few minutes thinking about what alternatives there might be for the words here, because these are the 5 areas of emotions that are commonly categorized. But what other words would convey anger? Because anger is a spectrum from mildly irritated, absolutely livid, and somewhere along the lines, people may be describing something to you. Glad, happiness might, yeah, it was quite okay. Yeah, it was good. Yeah, or yeah, it was amazing. They're all on that spectrum. So, you might want to think with anger, you might be mad, annoyed, livid, irritated, wild, furious, incensed, seeing red, all of those different words. But think, maybe stop the video at the moment and just have a think, what other words might say confused, baffled, bewildered, muddled, puzzled, perplexed, all of those different things. So try and make sure that you can recognize the variety of words that might convey these 5 emotional states. And the final stage is to verbally reflect back the feelings. So what you're doing is a little bit like a paraphrase, but make sure it includes an emotion as well. So it sounds as if you're feeling angry about what's happened. It sounds like you were really pleased about that. I'm picking up that you felt quite anxious about that situation. So you're verbally saying, this is what I think I'm hearing, but it's got to be done tentatively. And you've always got to check you've got it right. So can I just check if I'm understanding you here? Is this what you're saying? Or, when you've expressed the anger, expressed the what you've heard or think you've heard for the feelings, is that right? Have I understood that correctly? So you're always checking, never assuming that you've got it right. You're never going to be saying, well, you're obviously very angry about that. Try and do it immediately when you have picked up the emotions. Don't leave it 5 minutes and come back to it. Actually, I'm coming to the end of the session, but at the beginning, I thought you sounded quite cross about that. That's pointless. You've lost that opportunity to demonstrate empathy. So it needs to happen as soon as possible after you've picked it up. And if you are working with young people, and that's something that you commonly do, you're going to perhaps need different language. So try and become, if you work with teenagers a lot, become familiar with the language that they use, which might be quite different. And also different cultures express emotions in different ways. So you might have, emotional things with young people, who are feeling sad, they might say it sucks. If they're scared, they might be freaked out. might feel they've got to man up. There's lots of different words that will be used by different people at different ages. So just be mindful of that. So summarisation is the last skill that we're going to be looking at next week on the 16th. And this is about pulling together the whole story. So we're going to be focusing on the beginning of consultations and getting the patient to tell us their story, what's been happening for them, what's led up to the appointment. And then we need to practice summarising it, pulling the story together, including the content, which is the paraphrasing, and the emotions, if there are any. If it's not a particularly emotional situation, there's no point in trying to make it up. We're just trying to pick up the emotions that are expressed. So what it does is helps the patient to know that you have heard their story and gives you an opportunity to check that you have understood the story correctly. Like the paraphrase and reflection, tentative, check that you've understood everything. So with a summary, one of the key things you're going to ask at the end is that everything? Or was there anything else? And this is really, really useful for when people are telling long stories, because they hear the story and they then think, oh, actually, yes, you've heard that. If a patient keeps repeating things, it suggests that you haven't conveyed that you've heard it. So summarising can be really, really useful. And in practice, a lot of people don't do this very often. And I think that's a great shame, because I think it's really important. And it makes the patient feel heard and understood. And it's also a really good, helpful tool for you when you're writing up notes. If you've got a clear summary, you can write that in the notes, and it will be really useful for the next time you see that person or someone else sees them. So when do we summarise? When the patient's told you their story, to convey understanding that you've understood it. Perhaps at the end of a dietary assessment, checking you've got everything, you've understood everything. At the end of the consultation's probably the most obvious time, to check that you've covered everything, you're agreed with the goals and all of those kinds of aspects of what's happened, what's going to be happening next, but also really useful at the start of a follow-up appointment. So summarise where you got to last time. So if you were seeing a person again, you have got an opportunity to say, well, last time we met, we talked about this and that, and then we agreed this, and these were the goals that you were going to go away with. Would you like to tell me, how that's been going since we last met? So that summary, if you've got it in the notes and you can use it again, really helps that person. Actually, this dietitian remembers me. You might not, but your notes will help you to bring you and that person back together, to continue where you left off the previous time. So here's an example of a summary. It just sounds like the patient's story. So since you moved to your new job, you've struggled to get to know people. You're working long hours, and the people at work don't mix outside work. As your children have now gone to university, you don't have any contacts through them. You're so tired after work that you've not been doing anything in the evenings other than watching TV with a glass of wine. So you're feeling really fed up and lonely and can't see how to change things. Is that right? Have I missed anything? So you've got a story, you're pulling it together with emotion, struggle, content, new job, children left university, and you're pulling that whole lot together into a story that the person can say, yeah, that's it, you've got it. Or, yes, but also I wanted to tell you about this. So it's a really, really useful skill. I would encourage you to use it at a number of times in a consultation. Sometimes we'll do a paraphrase, sometimes we'll do a summary. And we don't need to do them too often, otherwise that gets really boring and repetitive. But there are certain times where it's a really useful skill. And I say it's one that you don't often see used in practice, which I think is something that we need to try and change.